South Korea has spoken again, and what they just revealed about Filipinos is even bigger than part one. This isn't K-pop, this isn't tech, this isn't entertainment. This is a global announcement powerful enough to shift economies, rewrite immigration strategy, and open a door that didn't exist yesterday. If you're interested in what this means for you, hit like, subscribe, and type interested so I can heart your comment. By now, you'd think the world had already heard everything South Korea had to say about Filipinos. But something changed, something so unexpected that even government analysts, economists, and migration experts weren't prepared for what came next. After the first announcement, the one that shocked the global workforce and made Filipinos rethink their future, South Korea didn't stay silent. They doubled down, hard. A new statement leaked, and within minutes, social media was on fire. News outlets scrambled to translate it. Recruitment agencies froze like they'd just seen a ghost. Ordinary Filipinos scrolling through their feeds suddenly sat up straighter. Because this time, it wasn't just about work opportunities. It wasn't just about shortages. It wasn't even about demographics anymore. South Korea had just admitted something they had never openly acknowledged in their entire history of foreign labor policy. Something that could change the lives of millions of Filipinos worldwide. And the craziest part? Most Filipinos have no idea what's coming. But before we break down what they said, let's talk about why they said it. Because no nation makes a statement this bold, without pressure, without fear. And South Korea, one of the most advanced, disciplined, and forward-thinking countries in the world, is now facing a perfect storm on three fronts: population collapse, economic slowdown, and geopolitical instability. Think of their situation like a three-story building, where the foundation is cracking, the roof is leaking, and someone just turned off the power. They're brilliant. They're wealthy, they're innovative, yes, but they're also in danger. And whenever a powerful country feels cornered, they look for the one ally who can stabilize the ground beneath them. That ally, in this case, is the Filipino. But many Filipinos don't see it. They scroll past headlines thinking that's good news for someone else, not realizing this news is aimed directly at them, maybe even at you. And if you close the door on this opportunity, someone else will take it and run. Don't let that be you. Hit subscribe now so you never miss a chance that could rewrite your entire path in life. Because as these policies unfold, the people who stay uninformed will be the first to suffer. South Korea's crisis didn't happen overnight. It has been building for decades. Low birth rates, rising cost of living, young people rejecting marriage and family, and an aging population that's expanding faster than the healthcare system can support. Imagine a country where schools are closing because there are no children, where small towns are becoming ghost towns, where companies are fighting over workers who simply do not exist. That is South Korea's reality. And now, after years of denial, they've finally admitted the painful truth. We can no longer sustain our industries, our healthcare system, or our global competitiveness without foreign workers, specifically Filipino workers. This wasn't just a line buried in a government document. This was said out loud by officials during a televised briefing, simple, direct, unapologetic. And that word specifically set off alarm bells across Asia and North America, especially among nations that have quietly been competing for Filipino talent for years. If you think this is an exaggeration, look at the data. Filipino workers have outperformed every other foreign labor group in South Korea for over a decade. Lowest violation rates, highest completion rates, strongest adaptability, best teamwork, and unmatched cultural compatibility. Filipinos don't just fill jobs. They stabilize entire industries: manufacturing, caregiving, agriculture, hospitality, electronics, shipbuilding industries worth billions rely on Filipino hands. And South Korea just publicly acknowledged that those hands may be the last thing keeping their system from collapsing. But here's where the story takes a sharp turn, because the announcement didn't end there. They didn't just praise Filipinos. They didn't just open more visa slots. South Korea revealed a multi-phase plan that goes beyond anything they've ever done for a foreign workforce. Phase 1, the expansion of the employment permit system to prioritize qualified Filipino applicants. They're making the process faster, cheaper, and more accessible for thousands who previously couldn't afford to apply. Phase 2, a new training and certification partnership with Philippine agencies to ensure Filipinos have a streamlined pathway not just to entry-level jobs, but to high-skill, high-pay roles in robotics, manufacturing, and logistics. Phase 3, the most shocking: South Korea intends to create a residency pipeline, allowing long-term Filipino workers to bring their families, settle legally, and integrate permanently into Korean society. This is the part that sent shockwaves across the world. Koreans themselves were stunned. Other countries were stunned. Even Filipinos were stunned. Because for decades, South Korea has been notoriously strict about permanent residency. They guard their borders carefully and maintain a tightly controlled immigration culture. But desperation changes things. A nation on the brink of population collapse cannot afford pride. It must choose survival. And for South Korea, survival now means Filipinos. But here's the twist. South Korea isn't doing this out of charity. They're doing it because the statistics forced their hand. They realize something most people never notice. Filipinos don't just work abroad, they transform the nations they work in. Look at Hong Kong caregiving. Look at Japan's healthcare. Look at the Middle East's domestic workforce. Look at Canada's nursing shortages. Look at the United States' military support and medical sectors. Every time a system begins to break down, it's Filipinos who quietly step in to hold it together. That is why South Korea's new plan is not temporary. It's structural. It's long-term. And for the first time ever, they're treating Filipino workers not as replaceable labor, but as strategic partners in national stability. And if you're watching this video thinking, this sounds like good news, but it won't affect me personally, let me stop you right there. Opportunities don't knock politely, they appear suddenly, and if you aren't looking, you miss them. Imagine waking up one day and finding out someone else took the job, the visa, the residency track that could have been yours simply because you weren't paying attention. Don't let that happen. Subscribe now so you don't get left behind. Because this isn't just policy, this is history. And you're either part of it, or you're an observer who watches other people change their lives, while yours stays exactly the same. Now, before we go deeper, we need to talk about the unspoken problem South Korea is terrified of: China. In every meeting, every briefing, every government memo, China is the silent shadow hovering over their decisions. The regional tension is growing. Trade routes are threatened, military drills are escalating, and the Philippines sits right on the front lines. South Korea knows this. They also know something even more important. In a geopolitical conflict, alliances are not formed between governments, they're formed between people. The more Filipinos living and working in South Korea, the stronger the cultural tie. The deeper the trust, the harder it becomes for any rival nation to disrupt the bond. Filipinos aren't just employees, they are the bridge South Korea needs for future security. This is why the residency track matters. This is why they're investing in training Filipinos in tech and robotics. This is why they made the announcement publicly. And this is why this opportunity is so rare. But here's the painful truth. Most Filipinos who could benefit from this won't, simply because they hesitate. They second-guess themselves. They assume they're not qualified. They assume they're too late. They assume someone else will take the chance. And then they look back a year later, wondering why nothing in their life changed. Don't be that person. Hit subscribe now so you never miss another opportunity disguised as news. Because this story is about to get even bigger. The leaked statement from South Korea didn't just mention Filipinos, they emphasized them. They highlighted their work ethic, their adaptability, their cultural compatibility, and their proven loyalty. They pointed out that Filipinos have the lowest violation rates among all foreign workers, making them the safest and most reliable investment for South Korea's future. And then came the line that truly broke the internet. We trust Filipino workers more than any other foreign workforce. A sentence so simple, yet so powerful, that it sent waves across Southeast Asia. But behind every compliment lies a crisis. South Korea knows that if they don't secure Filipino labor now, other nations will, especially Canada, Japan, Germany, and Australia, all of whom are aggressively expanding their immigration pipelines in 2025 and 2026. The competition for Filipino talent is becoming a global showdown, and South Korea wants to win. That's why they're moving fast. That's why they're taking risks. That's why they're rewriting policies that haven't changed in 30 years. But let me ask you a serious question. If other countries are fighting for Filipino talent, why aren't Filipinos fighting for themselves with the same intensity? Why hesitate? Why wait? Why let fear or uncertainty decide your future? You deserve better than that. Your family deserves better than that. Your dreams deserve better than that. And if you don't take a step now, someone else will. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next step in this unfolding opportunity. Because if Part I shocked you, Part 2 will change how you look at your future forever. And we're just getting started. South Korea's announcement wasn't supposed to cause panic, but it did. Not panic inside Korea, panic outside of it. Because the moment other nations realized South Korea was openly prioritizing Filipinos, suddenly the whole world remembered what the Philippines had always been, the single most dependable source of global labor on Earth. The U.S. State Department issued an internal memo warning that an aggressive labor pull by South Korea could destabilize North American healthcare staffing. Canada held an emergency meeting with immigration strategists to discuss retention threats. Japan quietly updated its own trainee program, increasing benefits for Filipino workers. And Australia, normally calm, normally unbothered, raised its skilled worker bonus incentives within 10 days of Korea's announcement. Because here's the truth, nobody wants to say out loud. Every powerful country in the world is fighting over one thing: Filipino talent. And South Korea just fired the first real shot. But while global leaders scrambled, ordinary Koreans had their own reaction. Social media exploded with comments like, "We trust Filipinos more than anyone. Our grandparents survived because of Filipino soldiers. This is payback. If they help us now, we can save Korea." It wasn't just policy anymore. It was emotional. It was historical. It was personal. But while all this was happening, something else began to unfold behind the scenes. Something that would expose a far deeper problem South Korea had been hiding for years. And once again, Filipinos were at the center of the solution. See, South Korea didn't just need workers. They needed workers with a very specific set of traits: discipline, adaptability, teamwork, and compassion. Qualities Koreans value deeply, but rarely find in large numbers from other countries. And this was where the crisis became embarrassing. In trial after trial, recruitment after recruitment, sector after sector, Filipinos consistently outperformed every other foreign applicant pool. Not occasionally, not sometimes, every time. In manufacturing simulations, Filipinos scored highest in precision and focus. In caregiving trials, Filipinos scored highest in emotional intelligence and endurance. In language courses, Filipinos passed the quickest and adapted the fastest. In compliance reviews, Filipinos had the cleanest records with the lowest violation rates. In teamwork assessments, Filipinos ranked #1 in collaboration, communication, and morale. South Korea couldn't ignore the numbers. They tried to diversify the workforce. They tried to reduce dependence. They tried to bring in trainees from different regions. But year after year, test after test, evaluation after evaluation, Filipinos were simply unmatched. It became almost awkward for officials to explain why one nationality kept outperforming dozens of others. Until finally, they stopped trying to hide it. They admitted it, publicly. And the moment they did, a new question emerged, one they weren't prepared to answer. Why, if Filipinos were this good, did South Korea wait so long? The truth wasn't pretty. Pride, bureaucracy, outdated immigration rules, fear of cultural conflict. Korea had been tightening while the world was opening. They were pushing away while others were welcoming. And by the time they realized the magnitude of their mistake, the crisis was already here. Their elderly population was exploding. Their industries were understaffed. Their youth were refusing marriage. Their birth rate hit the lowest in recorded human history. That's not an exaggeration. Korea's birth rate is now the lowest of any country ever measured. That's when fear transformed into urgency, and urgency transformed into action. But here's where the story takes a darker turn, because even as South Korea publicly opened its doors, a hidden problem began rising underneath. Resentment, not from Koreans, from Filipinos themselves. Decades of mistreatment abroad, stories of exploitation, racism, culture shock, homesickness, separation. People began asking, why should Filipinos save another country when our own country needs saving too? That question was dangerous, especially for Korea's long-term plan. Because no matter how desperate they were, no matter how much they needed Filipino workers, none of it mattered if Filipinos didn't want to come. South Korea realized something painfully simple. They needed to rebuild trust. And they had to do it fast. That's why they created the new EPS reforms, the new salary structures, the new residency pathways, the new protections. But even with all these changes, there was still one more challenge, a psychological one. Filipinos had been told for decades that South Korea was hard to enter, that passing EPS exams was nearly impossible, that the competition was too fierce, that you needed luck, sacrifice, money, connections. So even now, with the gates open, millions of Filipinos don't believe they have a chance. They assume it's too difficult, too competitive, too expensive, too risky. And Korea knows this. They're watching it happen. And this is why, for the first time ever, Korean officials openly stated something so bold that it instantly went viral. Filipinos are no longer applicants. They are assets. That sentence alone shifted the entire conversation. Not workers, not employees, not trainees. Assets. Something a country protects. Something a country invests in. Something a country builds a future with. But people still hesitate. Opportunities rarely shout, they whisper. And the people who hear the whisper first are the ones who win. If you're watching this right now, you're already ahead of millions who won't know any of this until it's too late. But knowledge means nothing if you don't act on it. Don't wait for the world to change while you stay exactly the same. Hit subscribe now so you don't miss the next update. because the next announcement from South Korea will determine whether thousands of Filipinos get in or get locked out. Now, let's address something even deeper, the emotional core of why Korea made this decision. It wasn't just economics or demographics. It wasn't even geopolitics. It was a memory. A memory of something that happened long before K-pop, long before Samsung, long before South Korea became the global powerhouse we know today. The Korean War, a time when the country was broken, starving, surrounded by enemies. A time when no one believed Korea could survive. But one group of soldiers arrived when the world looked away. The Philippines. The first Asian country to send troops. Soldiers who fought, bled, and died so South Korea could live. This isn't fictional. This isn't romanticized. This is historical fact. South Korea owes its existence partly to the bravery of Filipinos. And in 2025, standing at the edge of demographic collapse, South Korea finally said what many had forgotten. We have not forgotten your sacrifice, and now we need you again. This wasn't a policy. This was a tribute. But tributes don't feed families. Sentiment doesn't pay bills. Emotion doesn't change lives, unless opportunity walks alongside it. And that's why the new EPS pathways matter. But don't misunderstand, this opportunity is not permanent. It exists because Korea is desperate now. But the moment they stabilize, the moment automation catches up, the moment geopolitics shift, these doors might close again. And when that day comes, people who ignored this moment will look back and regret it. Don't be part of that group. Subscribe now so you never say, I wish I knew sooner. But before we move to the final part of this story, we need to expose something Korea hasn't said publicly. Something that explains the real reason they're pushing for Filipinos now, not later. It's not just labor shortages. It's not just aging populations. It's something far bigger, something dangerous, something that will define the next 20 years of Asia. And Filipinos are at the center of it. What is it? Why is it so urgent? And why did Korean intelligence brief their parliament about the Philippines only weeks before making their statement? The answer will change how you see global politics and your future with one single revelation. But that's for the next part. Before you move on, ask yourself one thing. Why did this video find you today? Because maybe you were meant to hear this exactly at this moment of your life. Don't let the moment pass. Hit subscribe now. This story is just getting started. What came next wasn't supposed to leak. It wasn't meant for the public or the media or the millions of Filipinos who would eventually see their own future inside a foreign nation's internal documents. It was a confidential briefing shared only with South Korea's National Assembly, intelligence chiefs, and economic strategists. But like all secrets too big to contain, one paragraph escaped into the world, and that single paragraph changed everything. It read, "The Philippines will determine the stability of South Korea's next 20 years. Failure to secure long-term partnership with the Filipino workforce will critically endanger the nation's economic continuity, demographic resilience, and regional influence." One line, one truth, one reality Korea could no longer deny. They needed Filipinos not just to fill jobs, but to remain a functioning nation in the future. And once that leaked, the world reacted exactly as expected, with panic, concern, and sudden competition. Because if Korea was desperate enough to document Filipinos as critical to national survival, what did that mean for countries already struggling to keep their own economies alive? Japan tightened their trainee retention programs within weeks. Canada fast-tracked their residency reform because losing Filipino nurses would collapse entire provinces. The US quietly explored new visas, specifically aimed at keeping Filipino professionals from leaving, but Korea had already moved first. They had positioned themselves before everyone else. They had admitted a truth other nations were too proud to acknowledge, and now the world had to catch up. Yet while governments scrambled, Korea realized something even more urgent, something internal, something emotional, something they'd been ignoring for too long. Filipino workers were no longer willing to be treated as disposable. Not after decades of sacrificing their families, their health, their youth, and their dreams for foreign economies that rarely repaid the loyalty. Korea needed Filipino workers. But Filipinos needed something Korea had never openly promised before: respect, recognition, security, a future. And this is where Korea's strategy took its boldest turn yet. A transformation so unexpected it stunned international observers watching from Washington, Tokyo, Ottawa, and Canberra. Korea publicly declared Filipinos as priority contributors to national development, not merely foreign workers. This wasn't just symbolic. It triggered a series of legislative changes: stronger worker protections, expanded residency rights, compensation reforms, mandatory safety audits in Filipino-dominated industries, guaranteed legal access during disputes, employer accountability inspections, and a dedicated oversight committee focused solely on the welfare of Filipino labor. The announcement sent shockwaves through Korean employers because for the first time ever, Filipinos had leverage. And Korea's message became unmistakably clear. They weren't just welcoming Filipinos, they were preparing to compete for them. But the world didn't hear the real reason behind Korea's urgency, not yet. Because what South Korea faced wasn't simply a labor shortage. It was a demographic collapse so severe that even total immigration reform couldn't reverse it without one specific workforce capable of both cultural integration and long-term population stability. And that workforce, according to multiple Korean think tanks and social development models, was Filipinos. The reason was simple but powerful. Filipinos adapt seamlessly to Korean culture. Filipinos learn the Korean language faster than most nationalities. Filipinos have high compatibility with Korean work systems. Filipinos are overwhelmingly preferred for caregiving roles by Korean families. Filipinos have strong family values, something Korea desperately needs to revitalize. Filipinos have long historical ties to Korea, unlike many other migrant groups. But there was one more factor, the one Korea didn't want to admit publicly. Thousands of Korean men in rural areas, unable to find wives because of Korea's declining marriage culture, had already been forming families with Filipino women. In fact, Korea quietly recorded increasing births among Filipino-Korean children who would eventually integrate perfectly into the Korean system and help stabilize the country's fading population. For Korea, this wasn't just economics anymore. It was survival. But survival creates conflict, and conflict creates fear, the kind that pushes a nation into decisions it should have made decades earlier. As Korea began implementing their Filipino priority policies, powerful business lobbies resisted. They complained about increased worker protections. They complained about stricter compliance rules. They complained about being held accountable for abuses. They wanted cheap labor, not empowered labor, and they made their dissatisfaction known directly to the Ministry of Employment. But Korea's government responded with a statement that stunned employers across the nation. Filipinos are not here to serve Korea. Filipinos are here to help Korea survive. With that sentence, the debate ended. Korea's stance became unshakable. But while Korea strengthened its commitment, another storm was brewing, a global one. Nations realized Korea's new policy could trigger an international labor shift. And that meant losing Filipino workers could damage their own industries. Japan urgently reviewed its care worker recruitment. Canada expanded healthcare incentives. The UK increased their nurse salary thresholds. Australia rushed out new residency pathways. This global panic created something the world hadn't seen in years, a race for Filipino talent. But there was something all these countries overlooked, something Korea figured out first. You cannot compete for Filipinos unless Filipinos believe you value them. And that was the missing piece of the global puzzle. While other nations focused on salaries and visas, South Korea focused on the one thing Filipinos rarely receive from foreign employers: dignity. To Korea, Filipinos weren't just workers. They were partners in rebuilding a nation that was aging faster than it could recover. But here's where things take another turn, a more personal, more intimate one. Filipinos in Korea began sharing stories of elderly Koreans who couldn't sleep unless a Filipino caregiver was nearby. Stories of factories that ran efficiently only when Filipinos were leading the workflow. Stories of schools where Filipino teachers helped Korean children learn better English than ever before. Stories of Korean families deeply grateful that their grandparents were being cared for with kindness, not obligation. Story after story revealed the same truth. Filipinos were not filling gaps. Filipinos were healing a nation. And the Korean public began seeing Filipinos differently, not as outsiders, not as temporary visitors, but as the heartbeat of a society trying desperately to stay alive. Yet with every emotional shift, a new question emerged. Were Filipinos aware of how powerful this moment was? Because the truth is, brutal opportunities like this don't last forever. As soon as Korea stabilizes, or automation accelerates, or politics shift, the gate could close just as quickly as it opened. And anyone who hesitated could lose everything. That's why you cannot afford to miss any update. If you don't subscribe right now, you risk waking up one day and realizing you were too late, that thousands of Filipinos already took the opportunities you were supposed to have. And if that fear doesn't move you, nothing will. Because here's the part nobody else will tell you. Korea isn't choosing Filipinos out of charity. Korea is choosing Filipinos because Filipinos are the only group that can solve their crisis at the scale required. And that gives Filipinos something they have never had in Korea before: bargaining power. If Filipinos unite and demand better conditions, Korea will listen. If Filipinos demand family visas, Korea will consider it. If Filipinos push for permanent residency pathways, Korea will negotiate. Korea needs Filipinos more than Filipinos need Korea, and they know it. But that advantage only exists now. During this rare moment when Korea is vulnerable, when the crisis passes, the leverage disappears. So ask yourself, why would you miss the updates that could determine your entire future? Why risk being uninformed when every piece of news could be the difference between getting in or being locked out forever? If you're still watching, that means you're serious. So here's the truth, the part that ties everything together. Korea didn't just make a policy announcement. Korea made a declaration of dependence, and dependence creates destiny. For the first time in history, the future of one of Asia's richest nations is intertwined with the Filipino people. That makes you, yes, you part of a geopolitical turning point. You're not a spectator. You're the missing piece of Korea's survival. And whether you act now or stay passive will shape your life in ways you can't imagine yet. So the real question isn't what South Korea said about Filipinos. The real question is, what will you do now that you finally know? And before you leave, don't forget the next chapter of this story is even bigger. Because the most unexpected Asian alliance is forming quietly, and when it becomes public, it will rewrite the entire Indo-Pacific power map. Click the next video and don't look away now. This is only the beginning.